The validation seals were older than most civilizations in the room. Chronicler Vareth held them in both hands. Prith archival markers, silver and engraved, each one representing 14 years of verified testimony work. She had carried them for 2 centuries. They had never shaken before. They shook now. The emergency council chamber held 312 delegates. Every screen showed the same thing: dates, names, orders, 217 incidents across 39 years, 83 extermination directives bearing official signatures, 3.7 million dead. Supreme Chancellor Gavrin rose from the Draith sovereignty platform. His segmented exoskeleton caught the light. 4 amber eyes arranged vertically, all fixed on the human delegation below. "This is fabrication." The word hung in the pale stone hall. Vareth's hand stopped shaking. She stood. The observer gallery had been silent for 6 minutes. Now every head turned toward the small, gray-skinned figure with silver markings along her cranial ridge. She walked down the steps. Her footsteps echoed. 43 hours earlier, she had expected to find war rooms. She had found something else instead. The center platform waited. She placed the validation seals on the wooden table beside a small metal box. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vaulted chamber. "No." Every delegate turned. "I verified 18,903 pages personally, and humanity brought the originals." The screens continued streaming. Gavrin's tri-fingered hands clicked twice. The ozone smell that meant stress began radiating from his platform. For the first time in 40 years of council observation, Vareth watched a Supreme Chancellor's certainty crack. But that moment, the one where truth became undeniable, had begun 43 hours earlier, in a place none of them had been watching. "I need to be honest with you about something. What happened next wasn't inevitable. Empires don't fall because of truth. They fall when someone finally believes it matters." The porcelain cup was still warm when Gavrin delivered the threat. Ambassador Cashin Thray sat on the recessed human platform, 1.8 meters below every other species delegation. The architects of the Grand Amphitheater had made their statement clearly: hierarchy through stone and measurement. Gavrin's voice carried harmonic undertones, dual vocal sacs producing frequencies that made smaller species flinch. "The Draith sovereignty offers final terms. Support our annexation protocols within 72 hours, or join the insurgent worlds in their consequences." Cashin held her tea, black, no sugar. Beside her sat a folded photograph, memorial stones under autumn trees, 23 markers at Settler's Ridge Garden. She touched the silver fountain pen in her jacket pocket 3 times, once for luck, once for courage, once for her sister. Then she opened her leather notebook and wrote 7 words in careful script, closed it, placed both hands flat on the table. "Humanity acknowledges the statement." No argument, no anger, just acknowledgement. The council chamber held 47 meters of vaulted ceiling and empty observer galleries like silent witnesses. 16 species watched. Most looked relieved. Humans had finally understood their place. Gavrin gestured. The central screens activated, footage of burning stations, shattered moons, bodies floating in debris fields. 6 installations, 18,402 civilian deaths. This is the cost of noncompliance. Several delegates looked away. The Kesari trade representative covered her vestigial wing structures with both sets of arms. The veteran scholastic observer closed his 3 eyes. Cashin did not look away. She watched every second, counted the stations, noted the species identifications on the hull fragments. When the footage ended, she stood. "Thank you for the clarification, Chancellor. We will provide our response within the stated time frame." Her voice stayed level, calm, the kind of calm that came from deciding something irreversible and then waiting for the right moment to act on it. Gavrin's amber eyes studied her, looking for fear, probably, for the tremor in the voice or the hesitation in the posture that confirmed submission. He found neither. The session ended. Delegates filed out through the tall archways. Cashin remained seated until the hall emptied. Then she unfolded her notebook again. Read the 7 words she had written. "We do not offer compliance to executioners." She touched the pen 3 times more, thought of Marin, 19 years gone, official record, industrial accident 0 casualties, actual toll 1,847 colonists, mostly children. The Draith sovereignty had erased it. Cashin's family had kept records. 8 hours later, the Atlantic Vault activated. Not a military installation, not a bunker, an archive. 13 stories beneath the ocean floor, accessible only through 3 separate transport locks and 2 biometric checkpoints that required living tissue samples. The walls were old concrete. The lighting was warm. Someone had left a kettle on. 7 people sat around a wooden table. Dr. Ren Vasquez placed a metal box in the center. Cold weight, dull finish. He opened it without ceremony. Inside, paper pages yellowed at the edges, printed text in 12 different languages, handwritten notes in margins, photographs of names carved into stone. 217 confirmed Draith suppression actions. 39 years. Verified through refugee testimony, communications intercepts, and forensic site analysis. Commander Nala Akoy spread transport records across the table, departure logs, arrival times, ships that left full and arrived empty. Logistics are clean. We can move the packets within 14 hours if authorized. Yuki Tanaka pinned star maps to the wall, red markers for Draith patrol routes, blue for independent systems, green for coalition possibilities. 11 target species, all marginalized, all with their own suppression histories. Darius Chen opened his communications terminal, encryption protocols already running. Channels are secure. Once we send, there's no recall. Colonel Isa Nkomo stood near the door, security liaison, watching the hall beyond. Vault integrity maintained. No external monitoring detected. Professor Anara Kemmel sat beside Cashin, interspecies law specialist. She was the one who had drafted the protocol 37 years ago, before Cashin had even joined the diplomatic corps, before most of humanity had understood what the Draith sovereignty actually was. Kemmel looked at the wall, 94,771 testimony files, each one a name, a date, a suppression incident the galaxy had been told never happened. Are we invoking it? Kemmel's voice was quiet. Cashin unfolded her council chamber note, placed it beside the metal box. We do not offer compliance to executioners. Every page, Cashin said. The wall behind her displayed the protocol title in plain block letters. Operation Archive Witness, Evidence Release Authority. Prepared 37 years ago, never used until now. Vasquez pulled the first file from the box. Prith Moon Scholar Haven. Official record. Reactor failure, 41 dead. Actual evidence. Draith strike team deployment logs, communications intercepts confirming military action, refugee testimony from 17 survivors who had been dismissed as unreliable. 22 years buried. He slid it across the table toward the empty chair, where Varith would sit 19 hours from now. Chen poured coffee. Tanaka adjusted the star maps. Akoy checked transport schedules. Work began. No shouting in the archive. No weapons on the table. No anger in the tea. Just people who remembered. 19 hours later, Varith arrived expecting something different. The human delegation had been threatened with extermination. Standard response. Military buildup, defensive posturing, emergency alliance negotiations. She had come to observe the war preparations, to document humanity's final attempts at survival before the inevitable happened. Instead, she found a kitchen. Someone had left berry preserves beside fresh bread on a wooden cutting board. An old radio played a string quartet. Second movement, if she recognized the piece correctly. The kettle was steaming. Cashin looked up from her tablet. Chronicler Varith, thank you for coming. I was told this was urgent. It is. Cashin stood, poured tea into a ceramic mug, handed it to Varith. But not the way you think. Varith frowned. 214 years of archival observation had taught her to recognize patterns. War rooms smelled like metal and stress. They looked like maps and weapons manifests. They sounded like raised voices arguing over impossible choices. This smelled like bergamot and warm bread. Vasquez slid a file toward her, plain manila folder, no classification markings. "Start with this one." She opened it. The Prith Moon Scholar Haven disaster. She knew it. Every Prith child learned about the reactor failure. 41 archivists lost. A tragedy of neglected maintenance and bad timing. Except the file in front of her told a different story. Strike team deployment logs. Draith military frequencies. Witness testimony from survivors who described armed soldiers, not reactor failures. Forensic analysis of blast patterns inconsistent with internal malfunction. Her cranial ridge started to ache. She rubbed the base of it twice. A habit when information contradicted what she thought she knew. "Where did you get this?" "We've been collecting it for 37 years, Cashin said. "Refugee networks, independent researchers, species who saw what happened but were told they were wrong, people who kept records even when the official histories said there was nothing to record." Vasquez slid another file across, then another. Nerith orbital camps, Kesari caravan massacres, Vethran seed colony destructions, Morin station purges, 19 species, hidden incidents, altered reports, missing populations. Verith's hands started shaking again. She had authenticated documents for 2 centuries. She knew fabrication when she saw it. Forged timestamps, inconsistent witness accounts, photographic manipulation. This wasn't fabrication. This was memory. She whispered, "How many know this?" "Very few," Cashin answered. "Until today." Within 14 hours, the first encrypted packet left Earth. Not to the Draith sovereignty. Not to the Coral hegemony or the Veshti axis. Not to any of the powers who sat in the Central Council chambers and made declarations about order and stability. To the overlooked peoples instead. Nerith refugee camps scattered across 19 systems. Kesari caravan networks that moved between borders no government claimed. Vethran seed colonies still rebuilding from disasters the official records called natural. Orathi scholastic unions that preserved histories in oral tradition because written records had been burned too many times. Prith independent archives that operated outside government control. Thin migratory fleets. Morin outer stations. 17 others. 11 species total. Small voices. Ignored histories. Testimonies dismissed as unreliable because they contradicted the versions powerful people had decided were true. Each packet contained the same thing: evidence, dates, names, witness lists, cross-reference documentation, forensic analysis, communications intercepts, no demands, no threats, no requests for military alliance. Only truth. Attached to every file, one sentence: "We do not offer compliance to executioners." By dawn, the responses started arriving. Kesari sent 5,309 testimony records. Events their caravans had witnessed over 40 years. Deaths they had been told didn't happen. Children who had vanished from border stations. Families erased from transit logs. Vethran opened sealed archives. 12,000 pages of suppression documentation they had kept hidden because speaking about it would have meant retaliation. Morin released refugee logs 18 years old. Names of people who had fled Draith territories and been turned away at every official border, told to return home, most never seen again. A coalition formed, not through treaty, not through fleets, not through promises of mutual defense or trade agreements or any of the formal structures that bound civilizations together. Through memory instead. Verith sat in the archive kitchen for 36 hours, validating, cross-referencing, applying every forensic authentication protocol the Prith archival traditions had developed across 4 centuries of scholarly practice. Timestamp verification, cross-species witness corroboration, document decay analysis, communications metadata extraction, photographic authenticity assessment, 18,903 pages. She worked in silence. Sometimes Chen brought her fresh tea. Once, Tanaka placed warm bread beside her tablet without saying anything. The radio played through the night. Brahms, Dvorak, a composer she didn't recognize but whose melodies made the work feel less heavy. Cashin sat across from her, not supervising, not watching over her shoulder, just present, working through her own stack of files, making notes in that leather notebook. At one point, Vareth looked up. "Why did you wait 37 years?" Cashin didn't answer immediately. She touched the silver pen in her jacket pocket 3 times. The gesture so automatic she probably didn't realize she was doing it. "Because we needed to be sure," Cashin finally said. "And because releasing it before we had enough corroboration from other species would have made it easy to dismiss. One species making accusations is unreliable. 11 species with matching testimony is something else." "What is it?" "Pattern." Vareth returned to the documents. Another 3 hours. Her eyes ached. Her cranial ridge throbbed. The pressure behind her secondary eyelids that meant she had been reading too long without rest. But she kept going. Because if this was real, if every page of this archive held truth, then 2 centuries of her professional work had been built on a foundation with holes in it. Histories she had validated, official records she had accepted, disasters she had documented as tragic accidents. Some of them hadn't been accidents at all. At hour 34, she placed her validation seals on the table beside the growing stack of authenticated files. Silver markers, Prith Archival Authority, each one earned through 14 years of flawless documentation work. She had 10 of them, representing 140 years of her 214-year life. She pressed them onto the authentication documents one at a time. Her hands shook, not from age, not from fatigue, from the weight of what she was making official. Cashin watched, didn't speak, let the old archivist work through the implications. When Vareth finished, she rubbed her cranial ridge twice. Breath through her nose the way Prith did when they needed to center themselves before speaking something important. "This evidence is authentic." 4 words quiet. "Irrevocable." The archive fell silent. Even the radio had stopped playing between tracks. Chen looked at Cashin. Akoi checked her transport schedules one final time. Tanaka adjusted a star map that didn't need adjusting. Kemal spoke first. "Do we proceed?" Cashin opened her notebook. Read the 7 words she had written 41 hours earlier in a council chamber built to make humans feel small. "We proceed." Cashin told Vareth about Marin on the 37th hour. They were alone in the archive kitchen. Everyone else had gone to prepare final packet distributions. The kettle was cold. Someone had left half a loaf of bread on the cutting board. "My sister died 19 years ago," Cashin said. "Settlers Ridge Colony. Official record lists it as an industrial accident. 0 casualties." She unfolded the photograph she had carried into the council chamber. 23 memorial stones under autumn trees. Actual toll, 1,847 colonists, mostly children. Draith sovereignty forces arrived without warning, classified the settlement as an unauthorized expansion into contested territory, gave the colonists 40 minutes to evacuate, then leveled everything. Vareth looked at the photograph. Small stones, careful spacing, trees that would have been saplings 19 years ago, now grown tall enough to shade the markers. "The families built the memorial themselves," Cashin continued, "because the official record said there was nothing to memorialize. No deaths meant no monuments, no investigations, no accountability." She touched the silver pen in her pocket, pulled it out for the first time. Tarnished cap, slender barrel. Under close light, an inscription was barely visible. "For Marin, write the truth they won't." She gave me this 3 days before the Draith forces arrived. She was writing a report on colonial resource management, boring administrative work, but she always used this pen for final drafts. Said it made the words feel permanent. The pen caught the light. Old, used, loved. When I found out what happened, what really happened, I started keeping records. Just my family's story at first. Then I met other families, other colonists who had survived other incidents, other species who had lost people to disasters that weren't disasters. She placed the pen on the table between them. The Draith sovereignty counted on fear. They assumed that showing overwhelming force would make everyone else fall in line, submit or be destroyed. Simple equation. Vareth watched the old human ambassador, saw the grief behind the composed exterior, The methodical documentation that was really just one person refusing to let her sister be erased. But they made a mistake, Cashin said. They assumed silence meant we had forgotten. It didn't. It meant we were writing everything down. 36 hours after Gavrin's ultimatum, the coalition was ready. 11 species, 43 independent testimony archives, 119,000 pages of documented suppression incidents, all authenticated, all cross-referenced, all impossible to dismiss as the unreliable claims of traumatized survivors. Professor Kemmel stood beside the main display screen. The emergency council session would begin in 7 hours. Standard protocol for existential threats to galactic stability. What happens when they realize what we've done? She asked quietly. Cashin looked at the wall of names. 94,771 testimony files. Each one a person who had been told their story didn't matter. They already have, Cashin said. They're deciding whether to believe it matters. The kettle started whistling. Someone had put it back on without anyone noticing. Chen turned off the heat, poured fresh cups, passed them around. 7 people, 1 archive, 37 years of preparation. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Atlantic. Soon, delegates from 312 civilizations would gather in a stone hall built to enforce hierarchy. They would expect humanity to submit, to accept the 72-hour ultimatum, to fall in line like every other marginalized species had done before. They would be wrong. Cashin touched her pen 3 times, once for luck, once for courage, once for Marin. Then she picked up her notebook and wrote one final sentence. The evidence speaks for itself. Let it. The emergency council session began exactly 7 hours later. Verith arrived early. She always did. 2 centuries of archival observation had taught her that the moments before official proceedings often mattered more than the proceedings themselves. People spoke more honestly when they thought no one important was listening. Today, the observer gallery filled slowly. Delegates arrived in clusters. Conversations happened in low voices. Several species she had never seen communicate before stood together near the eastern archway. Kesari, Nerith, Vethrin, Morin. They weren't talking about the session. They were sharing testimony. Verith took her seat in the upper ring. From here, she could see the entire chamber. 47 meters of pale stone vaulted ceiling. 312 delegation platforms arranged in concentric circles. The human platform still recessed 1.8 meters below everyone else. Cashin sat alone, black tea in a porcelain cup, the folded photograph beside her tablet. She touched her jacket pocket 3 times, the gesture so small most people would miss it. Verith didn't miss it. The chamber doors sealed at the appointed hour. Supreme Chancellor Gavrin entered through the Draith Sovereignty archway, 4 amber eyes scanning the room, segmented exoskeleton gleaming under the overhead lights. He moved with the certainty of someone who had never been told no. He took his position on the central platform, looked down at the human delegation. Ambassador Threy, has humanity reconsidered its position? Cashin stood, placed a small wooden box on the human platform table. No response yet. Just the box, plain wood, brass hinges, nothing impressive about it. We have prepared our response, Chancellor. Her voice carried the same calm she had used 43 hours earlier, the same measured tone that had made the council think she was afraid. Gavrin's tri-fingered hands gestured dismissively. Then formalize your compliance, and we can proceed to more pressing matters. Cashin opened the box. Inside, small metal plaques, engraved, names, dates, colony designations, nothing else. She placed them on the table one at a time. Settlers Ridge, Prith Moon Scholar Haven, Nerith Orbital 7, Kesari Caravan 93, each plaque a memorial for a disaster the galaxy had been told never happened. Gavrin's eyes narrowed. What is this? Evidence, Cashin said. Darius Chen activated the archive stream from Earth. Every screen in the chamber came alive. Dates appeared first, then names, then orders bearing official signatures. Incident reports that had never been filed, casualty counts that had never been recorded, extermination directives that had never been acknowledged. 217 suppression actions, across 39 years. The chamber stopped breathing. Gavrin's ozone smell intensified, stress radiating from his platform in waves. This is fabrication, propaganda designed to undermine legitimate sovereignty operations. But the evidence kept streaming. Communications intercepts, deployment logs, forensic site analyses, refugee testimony from 43 different species, cross-reference timestamps, witness corroboration, medical records from survivors who weren't supposed to exist, because officially there had been no survivors. 3.7 million dead, not a number anymore. Names, children, families, communities erased from official histories but preserved in memories the Draith sovereignty had assumed would fade. A Kesari delegate stood, then a Vethran, then 3 Nerith representatives. One by one, species who had never spoken during council sessions before rose from their platforms. Silent witness. Gavrin's hands clicked, once, twice, the sound sharp in the quiet chamber. These are isolated incidents, necessary responses to insurgent actions. Any civilization maintains order through. Vareth stood. The observer gallery had been silent for 11 minutes. Now every head turned toward the small gray-skinned figure with silver markings along her cranial ridge. She walked down the steps, the same path she had taken in her memory of this moment, her footsteps echoing, 214 years of archival credibility walking toward the central platform. Gavrin watched her approach. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Vareth reached the center table, placed her validation seals beside Cashin's wooden box, silver markers, Prith Archival Authority, each one representing 14 years of flawless documentation. She looked up at Gavrin, 4 amber eyes meeting her too. No. The word landed like a stone in still water. Every delegate turned, waiting. I verified 18,903 pages personally, Vareth said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Forensic timestamp verification, cross-species witness corroboration, document decay analysis, communications metadata extraction, every authentication protocol the Prith archival traditions have developed across 4 centuries. She gestured to the screen still streaming evidence, and humanity brought the originals. The chamber fell silent, not the silence of submission, the silence of truth becoming undeniable. Gavrin's exoskeleton ridges flared. You would stake your credibility on human claims. I would stake my credibility on evidence. 3 simple words, but they carried the weight of 2 centuries. Every document Vareth had ever authenticated, every history she had ever validated, every truth she had ever certified. She was certifying this one. The Coral Hegemony representative activated her platform screen. I move for immediate suspension of Draith sovereignty, voting privileges pending full investigation. The Veshti Axis observer seconded, then the Orathi Scholastic Union, then 6 others. Gavrin looked toward his delegation. 3 junior Draith officials sat frozen, watching the evidence stream continue. One was writing notes. Writing them down. This is without precedent, Gavrin said. His voice had lost its harmonic undertones. Just words now, flat, almost human in their uncertainty. So is this, Cashin replied. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The screens were doing the speaking. 19 member councils suspended Draith, voting authority within the hour. 14 trade corridors closed to sovereignty vessels. 9 formal investigations opened into suppression incidents, each one demanding evidence review, document authentication, witness testimony, the kind of review that couldn't be dismissed or buried or erased. Memory had become institutional reality. Gavrin's delegation stood, moved toward the exit archway, not a single word spoken. No threats, no declarations, just departure. The doors sealed behind them. The chamber remained silent for 4 minutes 11 seconds. Vareth counted. She always counted. Details mattered in historical documentation. Finally, the Prith senior archivist spoke from the observer gallery. Let the record show, evidence authenticated, testimony verified, truth established. The vote happened quickly after that. Formal procedures, legal frameworks, the machinery of galactic governance processing an outcome that had never occurred before. An empire toppled without a single shot fired, because empires run on the assumption that their version of history is the only version that matters. And this empire had forgotten that the people it erased had kept their own books. Cassian gathered her plaques, placed them back in the wooden box, closed it gently. Varith approached her. "What happens now?" "Now," Cassian touched her jacket pocket 3 times. "Now we remember properly." 3 months passed. Autumn came to Earth again. The trees at Settlers Ridge Memorial Garden turned gold and red. Wind moved through branches that had grown tall over 19 years. Workers placed new stones among the existing 23 markers, 217 additions, one for every verified suppression incident, each stone carved with names, dates, species designations, children who had died in disasters that weren't disasters. Varith stood beside Cassian beneath the trees. The old Prith archivist had returned to Earth specifically for this. She had authenticated the evidence. Now she would witness the remembering. Dr. Vasquez stood near the first row of stones, reading names aloud. Not ranks, not casualty statistics. Names. Individual people who had lived and died and been told they didn't matter. Children from 11 different species carried white flowers. Placed them beside the stones. Some were too young to understand what the markers meant. They would learn later. For now, they just knew this was important. Someone had brought a kettle, set it up on wooden benches near the garden entrance. Warm bread rested on cloth beside ceramic mugs. The same bread Varith had tasted in the archive kitchen months ago. Small comforts shared grief. Cassian walked toward one stone in particular, smaller than the others, placed at the garden center where autumn light fell through the trees most gently. HFY, Settlers Ridge Colony. Beloved sister. She wrote the truth. Varith watched Cassian reach into her jacket pocket, pull out the silver fountain pen she had touched 3 times before every important moment. "Why keep all this grief?" Varith asked quietly. Cassian looked at the stones. 240 total now, each one a refusal to forget. Because forgetting is how it starts again. She knelt beside Marin's marker, placed the pen against the stone's base, left it there among the white flowers a child had just set down. The inscription caught the light. "For Marin, write the truth they won't." Some truths no longer needed to be written. They had been spoken aloud, authenticated, made permanent in ways that couldn't be erased. Wind moved through the leaves overhead. Somewhere near the garden's edge, children laughed. Humans and Nerith and Kesari and Vethrin playing together near the small lake, not understanding yet what their parents had survived, just living. The way memorial gardens were meant to work. Varith rubbed her cranial ridge, not from stress this time, from something closer to peace. The Draith sovereignty still exists. It does, Cassian agreed, but they know now, everyone knows, and that changes what they can do next. Professor Kemmel approached with 2 mugs of tea, handed them over, stood beside Cassian looking at the stones. 94,771 testimonies, Kemmel said. We only had space for 240 markers. The rest are in the archive, Cassian replied. Safe, verified, waiting. For what? For whoever needs them next. Because power would always try to erase what it couldn't control. That was the nature of dominance. But memory was patient. It could wait decades, centuries, however long it took for the right moment. And when that moment came, memory would be there, written down, cross-referenced, authenticated. Ready? Varith sipped her tea, looked out across the garden. Children playing, adults standing among stones. Wind and light and grief held gently in a place built specifically to hold it. I need to document this, she said, for the archives. Cassian smiled. Small, tired, the kind of smile that came after finishing something that had taken most of a lifetime. Write it down, she said. The garden filled slowly, more people arriving, some humans, many others, species who had contributed testimony, families who had lost people to suppression incidents and been told there was no one to mourn. They came to witness the naming. Chen arrived with fresh bread. Akoi brought more flowers. Tanaka set up a small speaker playing string quartets. the same music that had filled the archive kitchen during those long hours of authentication. No speeches, no ceremonies, just people standing together in a place that acknowledged what had happened. The sun moved lower. Autumn light turned everything gold. Shadows stretched long across the memorial stones. Cassian remained beside Marin's marker. The silver pen rested against carved stone. Wind touched the flowers. The inscription was barely visible now in the fading light. But it was there, permanent, like memory itself. Verith took a photograph. Old habit, documentation. She would add it to the official record later. Another piece of evidence that truth, once spoken aloud and properly witnessed, became something power couldn't simply erase. Somewhere in the galaxy, former Draith officials were being questioned. Documents were being reviewed. Witnesses were finally being believed. The machinery of justice moved slowly, but it moved. And in a garden on Earth, beneath trees that would outlive everyone present, 240 stones stood in concentric circles. Each one a name, each name a refusal to forget. Children played near the lake. Adults shared bread. Wind carried the sound of their voices across water. The memorial garden at dusk. White flowers against gray stone. A silver pen left behind. Tea cooling in ceramic mugs. 11 species gathered to witness what remembering looked like when it finally became louder than silence. And in the quiet spaces between words, between stones, between heartbeats, the truth that civilizations conquer with fleets, but humanity endured by refusing to let the dead be forgotten. The last light touched Marin's marker, illuminated the words carved there, then faded as evening came. Cassian stood, walked back toward the benches where Verith waited with warm tea and the understanding that came from witnessing history being made permanent. The pen remained where she had placed it, resting against stone, surrounded by flowers, released from the burden of having to write what no one wanted to read, because now everyone had heard it, and hearing they could not unhear. The garden held its breath, then released it, wind through leaves, children laughing, adults murmuring, life continuing in the presence of honored grief. Dusk settled over Settler's Ridge, over the memorial stones and the people gathered among them, over the silver pen that had carried truth for 19 years and could finally rest, over memory made permanent, over names that would not be erased.